Israel will have a new prime minister after the opposition was able to negotiate a very diverse coalition. But will it hold? Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. A group of parties across the political spectrum has agreed to form a governing coalition in Israel. The Knesset is expected to vote on it next week, ending Benjamin Netanyahu's run as prime minister. It also ends 2 years of political deadlock. Stephanie Fried has more from Tel Aviv.
Change. That's the name and aim of Israel's newest coalition. Made up of disparate partners ranging from the extreme right to the liberal left, the coalition's formation ends Benjamin Netanyahu's 12-year run as prime minister and, for now, brings an end to years of political stalemate. But in Israel, where government terms are meant to last 4 years, but on average only survive 2, future challenges for this coalition are guaranteed. Far-right Yamina Party leader Naftali Bennett is due to serve as prime minister for 2 years. He'll then hand that role over to centrist Yesh Atid party head Yair Lapid. Skeptics doubt the government will survive long enough for Lapid to sit in the prime minister's seat. Bennett is a staunch pro-settlement advocate opposed to Palestinian statehood. Change coalition partners include members of the Islamic movement's Ram party. Leaders of the new coalition are reportedly aiming to avoid charged issues like the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, settlement, and Palestinian statehood for a year, focusing instead on neglected education, infrastructure, and healthcare programs, and passing a long-absent state budget. Benjamin Netanyahu will now lead the parliament's opposition. He has vowed to continue fighting, but his ability to wield influence, particularly around corruption charges he's on trial for, is weakened substantially with the advent of the new coalition. Stephanie Fried, CGTN, Tel Aviv.
To discuss what's next for Israel, we have on our panel human rights attorney Moien Odeh. He joins us here in Washington, D.C. Also here in D.C., Guy Ziv is an associate professor at American University. From Chicago, Sara Yael Hirschhorn is a visiting assistant professor in Israel Studies at Northwestern University. And Ian Lustick is the chair in the political science department at the University of Pennsylvania. He joins us from Philadelphia. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. And Guy Ziv, let me start with you. It looks at this stage like Naftali Bennett, will be the next Israeli prime minister. Of course, this still has to go to a vote on the Knesset. That could take place in the next few days or the next few weeks. Now, let's look at Bennett himself. He's described variously as being to the right of the current Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. As our reporter just told us, he's a strident supporter of Israel's illegal settlements and has made some very incendiary anti-Arab comments. In fact, he's criticized Benjamin Netanyahu for being too lenient on Hamas. So what does this mean for Israel?
I don't think Bennett is going to have the kind of power that some people think he's going to have as prime minister. He's leading a small party, and this disparate coalition of 8 different parties from across the political spectrum will not allow him to carry out his political agenda. So I think this new government is going to try to avoid major issues of contention. They're going to focus instead on infrastructure and the economy, healthcare, transportation, bread and butter issues that affect the day-to-day lives of the average Israeli. They're going to try to avoid issues like annexation of the West Bank or the peace process with the Palestinians.
Right, Guy, but can he afford to avoid issues like that?
Well, I think he's already taken a big political risk by joining Lapid, by joining this government. I don't think he has a very strong political base, and at this point, I don't know if he has much to lose. But he doesn't have the power. He will not have the power to do what he wants to do.
Moien Odeh, the Palestinian Ram Party will be part of this ideologically very diverse coalition. Here is the leader of that party, Mansur Abbas. Let's listen.
Education, welfare, employment. economic development, planning and construction, housing shortage, and of course, the eradication of crime and violence. There are many things in this agreement that benefit Arab society, as well as Israeli society as a whole.
So, Moien, there again we have Mansur Abbas talking about issues, a very narrow range of issues there, mostly domestic issues, things like education. He doesn't seem to have secured much for his membership in this coalition as far as the peace process is concerned, or as far as the conflict with the Palestinians is concerned. Was that a lost opportunity for him?
I think from the beginning, Mansur Abbas was very clear when, from the first few days, even before the elections, he was clear that he's running on daily issues rather than on big issues. He was clear that he's going to try to join the coalition. He's trying to get more budget for the Palestinian Israeli society. So it's not a surprise that he's speaking about this. I think he will try. He tried his best. Let's wait and see if the coalition will really succeed, and if they will give him what they agreed to.
Okay, Sara Hirschhorn, Benjamin Netanyahu, of course, has been fighting to keep his job. He's been Israeli Prime Minister for a total of 15 years. If all goes according to Naftali's plan, then he will be replaced. What role will Benjamin Netanyahu then play?
Well, I don't think that we can expect that Benjamin Netanyahu, after nearly 12 years in office, is going to go gently into that good night. He, of course, is facing 3 very serious charges of corruption, so his main day job, I think, going forward is going to be spending his time in court defending himself against these allegations. But certainly the Likud party, with him at its helm, and the other opposition parties will go into the coalition, go into the opposition, and I think that they are going to give the coalition a very difficult time trying to move the agenda forward. Naftali Bennett also, I think, is constantly going to be looking over his shoulder at Benjamin Netanyahu because Netanyahu has attempted to smear him and basically the entire coalition as leftists that will endanger Israel's security and future. And Naftali Bennett, who is, as Professor Ziva mentioned, is taking a political risk in joining this coalition as a right-wing ultranationalist himself, will constantly be dogged by the allegations from Netanyahu that he is not working in the interests of a right-wing agenda in Israel's future.
So, Sarah, would it be a little bit premature to write off Netanyahu, despite the fact that, as you've just pointed out, he's facing these legal challenges as well?
I think it's certainly premature to write off Netanyahu. It is not certain that Netanyahu will be convicted in any of these 3 major corruption charges, despite the apparent strength of the cases. And Netanyahu is not one to give up power easily. He has a lot at stake, both for his personal and political future. So I do not see him being willing to acquiesce to being taken off stage so easily.
In Lustick, the occupation continues. Israel continues to build settlements and blockade Gaza. Many prominent analysts and commentators have already pronounced the two-state solution dead. Naftali Bennett does not support a Palestinian state. He's said that more than once. So does this in any way mean another big nail in the two-state coffin?
You know, not only is the two-state solution dead, but the metaphor of its dying is dead. It's been beaten to death for a decade now. There is no two-state solution option, and that's why this change coalition was able to form. If there was any possibility of negotiations or even consideration of negotiations, that you wouldn't be able to get Nitzan Horowitz and Gideon Sa'ar or Naftali Bennett in the same coalition. We owe this change coalition to the fact that the Palestinian issue in Israeli politics as a diplomatic issue is completely gone. What we can look forward to, though, is a kind of enrichment or humanization, a development of the one-state reality that we're seeing happen before our eyes as Arabs become part of a coalition. The only way Israel can form a government that shows that Israeli democracy does things which, from an ideological point of view, its leadership would oppose, namely that you have to rely on Arab-Muslim political support. And there are things in this agreement that recognize the power of the Arabs in this situation. Specifically, so many of their so much money is being committed to the Arab sector, and a particularly invidious law has been, its implications or its implementation has been frozen now for a couple of years. That has been aimed at demolishing illegal Arab structures and so on. So I see this as a very important step that recognizes the absence of the two-state solution diplomatic venue and starts to focus our attention on what can be done to democratize Israeli rule of the whole area, including Gaza, East Jerusalem, and the West Bank.
What do you make of Guy Ziv's point then, in that Naftali Bennett doesn't, he may be prime minister, but he doesn't really have the political capital to implement any kind of major change?
But he doesn't want to. He doesn't really want to annex, because once you formally annex, you open faster than he wants to do opportunities for Arabs to claim equal rights. There's no impetus for him to change this one-state reality now, only to consolidate it. And from his point of view, that's an acceptable basis. He doesn't need to change anything. What the left and liberal folks in the coalition need to think about is how they can use their power to bring Arabs and to bring principles of equality and democracy for all who live under Israeli authority into the mainstream. So I would not, it's not that Naftali Bennett can't do it, and I do agree that he can't, but he doesn't even want to change anything. Things are going along just fine. There's no ban on new settlements in the coalition agreement, and there won't be any big thrust for it. Just the sheer momentum of the situation, in which 1 out of 11 Israeli Jews lives over the Green Line toward the West Bank, does the work that he needs done.
Guys, from what we know of this deal, Naftali Bennett will only be prime minister for 2 years. If it holds, if this coalition is going to be holding at that point, then the centrist politician Yair Lapid will take over as prime minister in 2 years. Now, Israel has had 4 elections already in the last 2 years, and there's already been talk of a 5th election. We don't know what's going to happen before this Knesset vote takes place. I mean, there could be defections, there could be anything that could happen before that vote. I mean, aren't we looking at a recipe for political chaos here?
Possibly gridlock, yes. But I think tonight's real star is actually not Naftali Bennett. We've spent the last 10 minutes talking about him. Yes, he might be the next prime minister, but he is not the essential figure here in this new government. That belongs to Yair Lapid. He's the real star of the history-making event tonight. Without Lapid, there would be no alternative government. And in the last 2.5 years, he has kept his eye on the ball, the goal being to send Netanyahu packing. He seems to have done that, even though it's not, he does not, the government has not been sworn in yet. So we have yet to see if that will take place in a couple weeks. But he has placed principle over opportunism. He has put his ego aside by helping to unite the center-left bloc and even foregoing the premiership. So I think he deserves more credit than anyone else for making history tonight.
All right, but Guy, sending Netanyahu packing may be one thing. What does he replace that with?
Well, I think that we are first looking at paving the road for the post-Netanyahu era. In the last 12 plus years, we have seen Israeli democracy erode. We have seen Netanyahu essentially hold on, grasp onto power at any cost. He has been indicted. He was indicted 1.5 years ago for various corruption charges, and he has really torn apart the nation in many ways, torn apart society, pitting left against right, Ashkenazi against Sephardi. I think that at this point, what Lapid is looking to do is to heal the wounds, to unify the nation on areas that maybe most Israelis might agree on. And so you might want to look at this government as a transitional government in that respect.
Sarah, given the widely divergent views of the member parties in this coalition, do you think it will hold for a long time?
No, not at all. I don't see that there's any way for any one of the major national issues, whether that's passing a national budget, healing the rifts between Jews and Arabs after intercommunal violence only a few weeks ago, or dealing with the Israel-Palestine conflict, that would allow that would not be politicized and essentially lead to the failure of this government and for the coalition to fall. It seems to me that there are two options: either the government does nothing, or it fails very quickly.
Is that an option for the government to do nothing?
I don't think so. Israel's been without a national budget for almost 2.5 years. That is maybe the most significant issue that needs to be addressed very quickly. And certainly after the events of the past few weeks, both the escalation with Palestinians in the occupied territories and the level of intercommunal violence that we've seen in Israel probably for the first time since the 1948 war, I don't think there's an option to merely sit on the sidelines. Moreover, even before this escalation, there was the death of 45 ultra-Orthodox men in a stampede. In any other country, this would have required an immediate national investigation and some degree of responsibility taken for a mass casualty event. There's just been so much that has been swept under the rug, partially because of the pandemic, but also because of 2.5 years of elections and governmental instability. And I don't think that can carry on much longer.
Moien Odeh, what are your thoughts on how this very disparate coalition could impact the relationship with Palestinians? I mean, it's all very well for leaders to say, look, we're going to focus on domestic issues in Israel, but one can't ignore the relationship with Palestinians.
I think, as my colleagues said in the beginning, that this government will do nothing in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, will do nothing in any important field. So from one side, the Palestinian society inside Israel is very interested to get more budgets to fight the crimes, to get better education, as Mansur Abbas is saying. From the other side, they are totally ignoring the political rights of the Palestinian people inside Israel from one side, and for the Palestinian cause from the other side. So again, I don't know how much Mansur Abbas and his 4 Knesset members, colleagues, can sit in the government or outside the government, but support it as they are saying, but without dealing with the Palestinian Israeli conflict, because this conflict will jump anytime, and they need to take a position, and they cannot stay on the side. So the question will be how they will do this. It's a very complicated question, but I believe from the beginning it's important for them. They see it as very important to be part of the coalition from now, to let Bibi Netanyahu leave the office as soon as possible, and then maybe they are thinking to do something else. But their big goal, I think, for everyone is to send Netanyahu home.
Ian Lustick, of course, all of this is happening at a time when the United States, initially the new administration, the new Biden administration, was reluctant to get involved in this, but now it has been involved. The Secretary of State has been to Israel. What do you think the future of that relationship is concerned? Because the U.S. is now trying to get a little more engaged. It wants to get involved in reconstruction in Gaza. It is talking about some return to a peace plan, if there is still one on the table. How will the relationship go to? Where will it go to from here?
Well, I actually have let's say, a more optimistic view of this government's future than my colleagues. And I think it's partly because the Biden administration and this new government, if it takes shape, have a common agenda, which is don't stir up big issues because we don't have any solutions to the big issues. Let's do small, practical things that humanize or liberalize in a managed way relations. And I don't really think that it's in the interest of the Biden administration or the new Israeli government to let big issues come up. I think it's often forgotten how the decision not to decide is one of the most stable decisions that the Israeli government has ever made. It made that decision after the Six-Day War in 1967, not to decide what to do with the West Bank and let events take their course. And that decision has had a tremendous legacy. And I believe that whole attitude of let's not decide things because we can't agree on what to do, but we can agree that we want to stay in office. Mm-hmm. And if crises emerge that lead to defections, they can recruit members of the opposition in order to replace those defections in the midst of a crisis. So I think we have to remember just how attractive it is to stay in office and how attractive it will be for the people who are taking office to stay there. And the Biden administration will help them because it does not want and is not pushing for some kind of breakthrough negotiations toward a solution that they don't believe is available based on the situation on the ground or the balance of power in Israeli politics.
What do you make of that, Sarah? Could this coalition actually be a bit more durable because they're going to focus on little things, not the big issues?
I don't believe that the little things are not political. I think that everything in Israel and in Israel-Palestine will be politicized, and even what may be billed as quality of life issues, whether that's resolving questions of crime in predominantly Arab cities, or dealing with the education budget, or tackling questions of transportation. All of these issues are inherently political in this context, and I think that any one of them could get the government bogged down into a political dogfight that would endanger the coalition's stability.
Guys, there is something else that has been happening, and I'm wondering to what extent Naftali Bennett can ignore that, and that is, after the recent Israeli onslaught in Gaza, there appears to be a significant change in public perception of Israel. We hear that especially here in the United States. Even close American allies, as well as groups like Human Rights Watch, now openly regard Israel as an apartheid state. Now, some people have criticized that kind of terminology. In fact, a U.S. analyst here, David Aaron Miller, says that using that kind of terminology will actually harden attitudes on both sides. But do you think someone like Bennett will be sensitive to the way the country is being perceived, Israel is being perceived, that is?
I think Bennett, whose parents immigrated to Israel from the United States, whose English is fluent, who's very familiar with the United States, and not just Bennett, but his coalition partners are intimately familiar with Americans and U.S. politics. I think that they're going to do whatever they can to improve the relationship with the Democratic Party. One of the unfortunate aspects of the Netanyahu era has been his complete devotion to the Republican Party. And he interfered time and again in our elections here and in our politics here. And that has alienated a lot of Democrats, especially younger, more progressive Democrats. And I think that that's something that this government is perhaps going to be more sensitive to. And again, Bennett is not going to most likely take these dramatic moves that are going to have that kind of impact on American public opinion anyway, unless Israel is dragged into another conflict with Gaza or Lebanon, which is very much possible.
Moien Odeh, how big a risk is this for the Ram party? I mean, they'll be joining a coalition that includes another anti-Arab politician, Avigdor Lieberman. I mean, will they have to show something pretty quickly for this, for joining the coalition? Could we perhaps see Arab ministers in the cabinet?
Well, I think it's all about the results. What results the Ram and the Arab Palestinian society inside Israel will get if the people saw results and good results from joining this coalition. So this will be a very positive impact on Ram. The opposite is right. Also, they saw that they joined an unstable coalition that couldn't deliver anything, so that will affect them negatively. So it's all about the results, how much results that they will get and how positive these results are. Again, everyone knows that Lieberman and others are very anti-Arabs, but the question again will be the result. It's all about the results here.
So what should we be looking for then, Moien?
For the Arab people, for
for,
people, first of all, they will look at the budget issue. They will look at the crimes issue, how the police are dealing with the criminals in the streets. I don't know if the people are knowing, but there's a lot of organized crimes inside the Palestinian society, inside Israel, and the police is doing nothing there. So if the people start seeing that the police are taking actions against the criminals, there's more indictments, there more arrests in this area. This will be very important at the beginning. The second side will be also the money, how much budget the schools will get, the infrastructure, and for sure from in the south, the Naqab, the Negev area, the Bedouin society, the unrecognized villages and communities, they are seeking to be recognized. So this will be, I think, this will be very important for the people on the daily life issue. For sure, from the other side, the political issue will be very, very important for them to see what will happen with Gaza, what will happen inside Jerusalem, because I think everybody is expecting Ram and Mansur Abbas to at least to prevent the authorities from keep going what they are doing inside East Jerusalem, Sheikh Jarrah, Silwan neighborhood, Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood, as I said, and other neighborhoods inside East Jerusalem, to stop the evictions, to stop the house demolitions there. So all of this will be a big test for the party.
Sarah, of course, the Israeli Knesset still has to vote on this, and we're not sure when that vote is going to take place. There's some people who believe that it could take place in about 2 weeks. What are the risks in that? I mean, could we see more horse trading take place, even though all these members of this coalition have signed off on it? But could we see defections? Could we see this unravel?
I think so. To be honest, even tonight, as the coalition was announced, there was still some uncertainty about some ministries and about, continued horse trading amongst various factions who have own political agendas here. I think the real test will be as Israel emerges from a post-COVID era and some of the real business of the state begins to be done, to see how stable and loyal various members of this coalition will be, both to one another in their own parties, but as well as to each other. And I'm not so certain, as one of our other panelists had mentioned, that should there be some members of the coalition who will find themselves alienated from their colleagues, that it'll be so easy necessarily to recruit amongst the opposition to fill in any gaps. As we might recall, this government hinges on only 61 seats, the most barest majorities in the Knesset, and is really very vulnerable to the political will and the political whims of any one member of the coalition from any one of these 8 parties. So it's very uncertain how things will look going forward.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That is it for this edition of The Heat, but the conversation continues online. Join us on CGTN America's Facebook page to comment on this or any other show, or chat with us on Twitter @CGTN America. I'm Arnold Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.